Hey everyone, it's Allie, and we finally have the patch notes for the next Last Epoch season. This time around, we are getting some pretty major meta shakeups with a lot of popular builds being nerfed, and a lot of underutilized skills, and a lot of underutilized masteries being massively buffed. We are going to have the most diverse season of Last Epoch that you'll ever see, and I'm really excited as the meta has been pretty stale for the past year and a half, with the only new additions being Runemaster, Falconer, and Warlock. These never really made that big of a difference to the game overall, as they didn't really change any of the old things. I'm excited that some classes and some skills that haven't literally been touched for years are finally getting the love and support that they need to make into really interesting skills. We are not going to be going over any of the major gameplay additions that are coming with the season, or we're going to be only focusing this video specifically on all the balance changes, as that is going to be the most important thing for you deciding what build you're going to want to play next season. I'm going to try and categorize everything into chapters, so feel free to skip around and go to the section that you specifically want to. And without further ado, let's get into it and let's talk about all the changes. So first off, let's talk about what is happening with channeled skills. Channeled skills are not going to be reworked to where you can now regenerate mana while actually channeling them, with the downside being that they're gaining an additional 8 mana cost added to your channel cost, which is going to make up for the 8 generic mana that you have by default. Effectively means that you can now stack mana regeneration rates and actually deal with the channeling costs of some skills. And because your mana regeneration is not completely turned off, this overnight literally makes all channeling skills that were not word path into viable endgame skills. You can very easily expect to see some build guides pop up. I can very easily see this become a very popular archetype in the game overall. And next, let's talk about some ailment changes. So Frostbite has been buffed by 40%. If you're looking to play a Frostbite build, enjoy. It's now a lot better. If you weren't looking to play a Frostbite build, you might want to consider one, as Frostbite is now going to be even better than it was before. Frostbite was already pretty much one of the best ailments of the game, and it's only being made better, which is really exciting as it was really fun to build around, and most of the builds and archetypes that really supported Frostbite were underutilized. With that said, they are nerfing Withering to where you can only stack it to 10 times instead of 20, which was a debuff that made you do more damage with curses, which is a pretty big nerf for Warlock players. And they are buffing blind to where it always makes it so enemies can't crit, meaning if you have a way to apply a lot of blind easily, you can just invest into that instead of investing into reduced damage taken from crits or crit avoidance overall. Next, let's move on to Warlock, as Warlock is getting a pretty massive overall nerf to the class. I think the place where we should start is going to be with Chaotic Fissure, as it's going to be by far the most popular thing that people have been playing on it. Chaotic Fissure's Twisted Waves has been nerfed by 33%, making the scaling per necrotic resistance substantially worse than it was before. When you add this with the Withering change, where you're now going to get less damage per curse, your Chaotic Fissure is going to overall do a lot less damage. They have also fixed the interaction with Melon's Hubris, where your Spirit Plague gave you 3 stacks of bleed and 3 stacks of ignite at the same time. And most Warlock players abuse this as a way to scale their oblation really quickly by both giving them the ignites at the same time applying the bleeds onto themselves for the sake of Aspect of Death, which gave you more damage per negative ailment on you. This is going to overall be a pretty massive nerf to Warlock on top of the Fissure nerf, especially when we consider that Oblation has been nerfed pretty substantially, making it so you can only stack to 20 times now, making it substantially weaker than it was before. The other thing to add onto this that is going to be a massive nerf for Warlock is that they're also nerfing some of the passive points for it. Your Mastery is now going to only give you 4% increased damage per curse instead of 5%, which is an overall 4 to 5% total nerf for any Warlock damage, while at the same time they're nerfing the channeling nodes to give you less damage reduction and less increased ward while you're channeling. To add onto this, Ghost Flame is being nerfed to where the dodge node is basically dead, where it's being nerfed by 90%, and overall Ghost Flame is getting some adjustments to it, make it so you're going to be a little bit slower during it, and the DR that you get while channeling Ghost Flame is now going to overall be weaker. These are some pretty major nerfs to Warlock, and it's going to target both their defenses and their tankiness, but if you were never abusing Ghost Flame in the first place or channeling it, it's not going to really make that much of a difference. Lastly, Chaos Bolts also got a small nerf because the Chaotic Rupture node on Chaotic Fissure has been nerfed to 13% instead of 20%, meaning that any sort of auto bomber fissure build is now going to be substantially weaker than before. I don't think this is too big of a deal, as self-cast Chaos Bolts was starting to become very popular. It's most likely going to be where all of the Chaos Bolts builds are going to have to shift to into you actually pressing the skill manually. Next, we have some pretty major changes for Runemaster. First, they're making it so Rowan's Frostguard is losing the damage reduction on it, meaning you're going to be a little bit squishier to dots, but they're going to compensate by making the ward per second 150% better than it was before. Overall, this is going to be an adjustment to it, and you're going to have around 1 to 1,500 more ward on your Runemaster at all times in comparison to what you had before, but the 30% damage reduction really does suck for any sort of dot damage that you came across. I don't like that this is a nerf for pretty much all Runemaster builds, period, as it's not going to target specifically any of the abusive cases, but it's going to make overall Runemaster a little bit weaker, which I'm not really too big of a fan of. They're also adjusting some of the passive nodes for Runemaster to where, for example, Celestial Doom now is going to give you 100 ward all at once, but it's not going to give you 28 ward every single time that you hit an enemy, with it having a 1-second cooldown. This is going to be fine fine. And if you weren't doing 4 hits per second, you're going to overall be gaining more ward from Celestial Doom. But if you were doing more than 4 hits a second, i.e. Frostclaw, this node is now going to be severely weaker than it was before. They're also nerfing Jagged Veil for multi-fast hitting builds, where you're now going to be getting 2 ward per point, which is double the amount you used to give before, but you can only proc it 5 times a second. Again, great for builds that don't attack too fast, such as Plasma Orb, but bad for builds that attack way too fast, such as Frostclaw. I personally, overall, don't really think that these nerfs are going to be that big of a deal for Runemaster. There are going to be some other ones, such as the cooldown per int is going to now be 1% per 6 instead of 1% per 4, which is not the end of the world. And I think Runemaster is going to be in a pretty comfy position overall. Plasma Orb basically did not get touched in the slightest, meaning that Runemaster is still going to have an unbelievably strong build with that. But Frostclaw builds are effectively going to just be completely dead. Not only did they nerf the amount of ore they can gain in Frostclaw, but they also just completely killed Frostclaw itself by making it so you cannot gain additional mana on each bounce, and you're only going to have the chance for the mana refund to apply on the first cast of Frostclaw. This effectively completely kills Frostclaw and all of its variations. And if you want to play Frostclaw in the future, we are now going to have to find a new way to play with it rather than the self-casting version that Runemaster was abusing. And finally, for the nerfs, let's talk about what is happening to Falconer and Rogue overall. Falconer is getting a massive nerf too. They are nerfing the base Falcon damage, meaning that everything your Falcon's going to do, such as Aerial Assault and Dive Bomb, are going to be substantially bigger than before. While at the same time, they're going to be nerfing Aerial Assault, where you can't get Umbra Blade stacks anymore from Plume Daggers, and they are nerfing Umbra Blade's Blade Storm specifically to have a 40% reduced chance to inflict a Shadow Dagger, meaning that you are going to overall get substantially less Shadow Daggers than you were able to before. This by itself is going to make the Falconer build they popularized a lot weaker to play as an early game build, and unfortunately as an end game build as we transition out of the Shadow Dagger playstyle into a Dive Bomb playstyle, because again we have the Falcon nerf overall. Not only is the Falcon itself going to do less damage, but Dive Bomb's base damage has also been pretty drastically nerfed. They're also nerfing the Shadow Falcons to where they're now going to deal 60% less damage instead of 25% less damage, meaning between all the nerfs that happened to the build in 1.0, as well as the nerfs coming through all of this, the build is now just going to do a lot less damage than it did before. It probably is still fine, and it probably still deals a decent amount of damage, but just the Shadow Dagger nerfs alone in the early game are going to make the build really not feel that comfortable to level. They're also nerfing the shield that we abused, where the roll on the Aegis stacks and the block chance they used to give is now going to be a lot smaller, meaning that we can't just hit 100% glancing blow as free as we did before. Because of all these changes, I personally am not going to support the Falconer build anymore, and I'm just going to unfortunately just leave it as a one season build, which was just a really fun one-off thing. There's a bunch of other nerfs in here that kill even further, such as Gustborn Guard only being half as effective, meaning the low life version of the build doesn't really work anymore. A final nerf to Falconer, which is going to apply to pretty much almost all Falconer builds, is going to be the Avian Arsenal nerf, where you can now only have 5 stacks of Avian Arsenal instead of 10, which is a massive overall reduction in the damage your Falcon's going to do, which means that Falconer is going to be in a much more healthier place. But unfortunately, the Falconer build that I played was just overall nerfed so much that it really honestly isn't really worth considering. I am not too happy about just how many nerfs that they decided to target at this build all at once, but honestly, for the sins that build committed last season, I can understand why they decided to nerf so many aspects of it at the same time. With that out of the way, why don't we start talking about something positive and start talking about all the buffs that we're going to see for this season. So one of the first major reworks that we need to discuss is going to be the Spellblade rework. A lot of Spellblade's passive tree is getting threshold abilities added to it, and a lot of the nodes are actually being reworked into being substantially stronger than before. Spellblade overall is going to have a lot more tankiness than it did, and its on-hit ward generation is going to be better, and at the same time it's going to have access to a lot of new tools and a lot of new abilities to be able to stack dexterity, which is something that's very important, as one of the most popular builds for Spellblade was specifically a Bloody Niv Shatter Strike build. I love the changes that they proposed for Spellblade, and I think it's going to honestly probably be just as good as Runemaster is, meaning that the mage meta isn't going to be completely dominated by Runemaster being the only viable mastery. A lot of what you're going to see here for both this and for the Circ changes is that they're going to be brought more in line closer to where Runemaster was. For a long time, we memed that Sorc and Spellblade were just weaker Runemasters, and unless you had to play the build as a Sorc or a Spellblade, you should have just played as a Runemaster. And I'm really glad that we are getting a lot more balance between the three, where Spellblade most likely is going to become a very meta mastery, and I could very easily see a lot of build guides coming for it. To add on to this, they are massively buffing Shatter Strike, with a lot of the passives on the skill either being buffed so they work on non-frozen enemies, or overall just being made a little bit stronger. I think this is probably going to just by itself make Spellblade into a very strong league starter, given how good Shatter Strike and the 3 or 4 different builds on Shatter Strike were already. They're also going to be buffing both Flame Reave and Firebrand, which I'm so excited about. For Firebrand, they they are reducing the mana cost on Triple Strike and the mana cost on Charring, which were two nodes that really heavily kept the skill back from being really strong. And a lot of the other nodes are also just being made a lot stronger. Firebrand was a skill that was typically paired with Flame Reave as a combo ability, and it was a pretty fun playstyle and used to be good back in the day, but unfortunately over time it just has not been able to keep up. Flame Reave is going to be really good with either Firebrand or just as a solo build. The thing holding back Flame Reave was the sheer mana cost of the skill. Dancing Flames used to give you less mana cost, which is now going to be buffed, but the downside of it was that the skill didn't go as far as it should. They are massively scaling back the reduced range that this node is going to give you, meaning that it's going to overall make your skill feel even better than before. The other major thing here is the Ember Infusion buff, to where it no longer penalizes you by making Flame Reave cost more mana. This node was required to be picked up on every Flame Reave build because the point after it allowed your Flame Reave to come back to you, effectively doubling the damage of the skill. Because of these two changes alone, Flame Reave should now be very meta, especially given that both Ignite Flame Reave are really good on Spellblade, and crit-based Flame Reave, because of all the scaling that Flame Reave has, is going to be really insane. I'm excited to see what people are going to come up with Spellblade, and it's going to be in a much healthier spot than it is before. Now for Sorcerer. So I'm going to have a whole video on this topic because there's so much I want to say about Sorcerer, but the TLDR about all the changes for it are that its tree is also going to be made a lot better. They're going to have a way for it to actually stay alive in the early game through Mana Shell, while at the same time be able to scale its defenses off of its mana really well into the late game. They did a really good job with making a lot of the underutilized and bad points on Sorc a lot better. And then at the same time, they're also just massively buffing their mastery to where instead of it giving you 1% increased damage per mana cost, it's now going to be 1% more damage per 2 mana cost, up to a cap of 50. This means that you can now gain a lot more damage out of their mastery, and their mastery is most likely the single best mastery in the game, period. Even better than Falconer's mastery, which gives Falconer an unbelievable amount of additional power. To add on to this, they are completely reworking Disintegrate with it getting a completely new tree. And I've talked about the Disintegrate changes a little bit, and I'm excited now that we can see the full tree for it. A major sticking point of it is you can either go and play it as a lightning build where you are stacking mana. It's going to give it increased damage per point of mana that you have, or you can go a fire-based build where you're stacking intelligence. It's going to gain increased damage from each intelligence point. Overall, Disintegrate is looking to be really good, and most likely might be the best skill in the game to level a mage with now, as all the points are just really good. Because of the channeling changes where channeling skills are actually viable now, we can also see Disintegrate potentially just becoming a really good endgame skill, especially because there's two very good ways of scaling its damage even further. They've also reworked fire auras on the Spellblade tree, where fire auras can now scale based off of your intelligence, meaning that a Disintegrate fire aura sorcerer build picking up the Spellblade point to be able to scale it might also be really strong. I'm excited for fire aura, as fire aura always had a decent potential, and with that one single change, I think fire aura might actually be a pretty mid-tier build, which is better than what it was before. And finally, let's talk about the Forge Guard rework, because my god, they did exactly what the community asked them to do. They have turned Forge Guard from a meme mastery into something that you actually actively want to play. Forge Guard has had the issues of most of the nodes just sucking or having really bad downsides or just not having anything good related to them, and instead they've replaced a lot of the bad nodes with a lot substantially stronger nodes that give you either more damage or a way to stay alive. Some examples of this include Walls of Solarium, where you're just going to take 5% less damage at all times, and this is going to be doubled to 10% less damage if you have at least 50% block chance. You're going to want to scale block chance in Forge Guard anyways, making this node just a consistent 10% less damage taken. They're also going to just be buffing their mastery to where instead of them gaining 3% increased armor every time they get hit, they're going to be gaining 5% instead, and it's going to last substantially longer, meaning that they're going to be able to scale their armor very high. When we combine this with Iron Attunement, which is going to now give them less damage taken over time per point of attunement, giving them the single best passive point in the game for reducing endgame high corruption damage, as damage over time is the scariest thing, they are going to be a monster being able to tank, making them a lot more viable than they were before. Not only that, but they have some other really interesting points, such as Champion the Forge, giving them 1% crit multi per 2 strength, and with them easily be able to hit 150 strength. This is 75% crit multi with any two-handed kill, as well as the 50% increased chance the node itself gives. And then we have Master Arms, which is going to give them 18 additional strength on top of it, making them potentially have a very silly amount of strength for any sort of strength stacking build. They've also reworked Shieldcrafter to where it's actually usable now, giving you a 50% chance on block to cast a ring of shields around you, which is a very nice utility skill for them that's going to be used in a lot of different builds. Finally, they have some pretty massive buffs to Forge Strike and to forged weapons. They are going to be reworking Hammer and Anvil into a point now gives your minions armor shred chance, as well as a massive attack speed steroid every time you use 20 mana on a skill, which is going to be very simple to do given Forge Strike costs at least 25 mana. And they are going to be massively buffing the forged weapons themselves to be substantially stronger than they were before. Overall, I really think Forge Guard is a massive cook, and it's going to be a really good class fast, and I think a lot of people are going to be excited about starting it next season instead of it being a complete meme. They've also reworked a few of the skills that are related to all this. Shield Bash is getting a full rework, which now allows you to actually play as a DPS skill. Shield Bash is really cool because it is a skill that does not scale off of your weapons or your shields at all. Instead, it simply scales off of your block effectiveness and off of your strength. With Indomitable Force giving you added melee damage per 40 block effectiveness, this just makes you want to do nothing but scale your defenses as much as possible and scale your block as far as you can. And with Iron Arms giving you more damage per strength, it allows you to also double dip off of the increased armor that strength gives you. This means that Shield Bash overall should feel really strong as a skill, and it's going to be really good as an endgame skill given that all you're doing is just scaling your defenses the whole time. Forge Guard is also getting a new weapon, which is just a shield they can equip in your main hand, meaning they can dual wield shields now, and because of that, they should be able to scale Shield Bash to a very high extent. I'm excited for these changes to Fortnite, and honestly, I might be checking out a bunch of Fortnite myself in the upcoming season, as it's just going to look very solid in comparison to what it was before. Overall, I really like the patch notes for this season. I like that now all 3 mage classes are actually viable to be played, and it's not just everything being in the shadow of Runemaster. And sure, while at the same time, Falconer might have been nerfed by a pretty substantial amount, and sure, Warlock might have been nerfed by a decent amount too, we now have all of Forge Guard, all of Spellblade, and all of Sorcerer to look forward to, as well as the countless other changes that I glossed over here. There are quite a lot of other buffs to a lot of other skills in here, and a lot more things are now going to be substantially more viable than they were before. It's going to be exciting to see what everyone cooks. I am very happy with this, and honestly, we know there were nerfs that were going to be coming. They might be a little bit harsh, especially in Warlock's case, but I am not too upset with it given just how much more fun Last Epoch should be when we combine it with all the new endgame content that we have. I think this is going to be probably the single best time we're going to have in Last Epoch ever since the game was originally put in beta, and I am looking forward to the future of the game, because if they are going to have every season be a banger like this, then the future is going to be bright. If you have any questions on anything we went over here or want to discuss anything further, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below, and I'd be more than happy to discuss or help you with any sort of question you might have. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so feel free to come by Twitch and ask me any questions there, or if you just want to be a part of our community and hang out with all the cuties, I'd be more than happy to see you there as well. With all that said, cuties, I hope you join me for 1.1. I hope you have fun with whatever build you decide to play. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all in the next video.